This cold and flu season, Instacart is here to help deliver all of your sick day essentials. Whether you're in prevention mode and need vitamins, hand sanitizer, and that lemon tea your Nana swears by, or you're in healing mode and need medicine, soup, and a lot more tissues. Simply download the Instacart app and get sick day supplies that reinvigorate or relieve, delivered in as fast as 30 minutes. Plus, enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 orders. Excludes restaurant orders, service fees, and terms apply.
7 things you don't really need to know, but probably should. I'm Jamie East, and this is the Sunday 7.
On today's episode of the award-winning Sunday 7, we mark 5 years since the pandemic, we get a warning about the perils of slushies for your kids, and we hear about a major breakthrough in artificial hearts from Australia. Plus, Will Guyatt, the Smart 7's resident tech guru, catches us up on the latest with Elon Musk and reads some AI-generated fiction. If you're enjoying these pods, please do like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts from. We're here 7 days a week at 7 a.m. with the 7 biggest stories on the Smart 7. But before we get started, it was on this day in 1819 that the first clinical description of an allergy was delivered to the Royal Medical Society in London. Dr. John Bostock described a case of the periodical affectation of the eyes and chest, which will be familiar to anyone dreading pollen season. What we now call hay fever was briefly, more grandly known as Bostock's catarrh. Bless you. Last week marked 5 years since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in the UK. And if you're like me, you've probably blocked a lot of it out. It sort of seems like a weird fever dream, working from home, nightly briefings from Boris, masks, clapping on doorsteps and the rest. And even though we're 5 years on, the pandemic's changed the way we work, the way we think about vaccines, and affected a younger generation in ways we may not find out about for some time to come. Last Sunday saw commemorative events across the UK to mark the 227,000 people who died during the outbreak and to pay tribute to frontline healthcare workers and the scientific community on the new official annual COVID Day of Reflection. Speaking at an event at the COVID Memorial Wall, which holds pictures of over 3,000 of those who died, Florence Eshalomi, the MP for Vauxhall and Camberwell Green, called on the government to learn the lessons from the outbreak.
Today is not just a chance for us to look back and reflect. It's about how we honour those who died. It's about how we remember people who are still living with the effects of COVID-19. It's about making sure as a country we never pay that high price again going forward, and we learn the lessons as it was shown in the inquiry.
We've probably blanked out the horror of the worst days of the pandemic and the battles that went on in the NHS to save desperately ill patients, such as poet and author Michael Rosen. He spoke to Sky News about his pandemic experience and recalled having to sign a disclaimer before he was put into what turned out to be a 45-day induced coma.
The care was amazing. The last thing I remember was a doctor standing by my bed and saying, would I sign a piece of paper that would allow them to put me to sleep? And I said, will I wake up? And they said, you've got a 50-50 chance. And I said, what if I don't sign? And they said 0. So I signed.
There are still an estimated 3% of the population suffering from long COVID, which includes a range of symptoms like brain fog, shortness of breath, heart palpitations and muscle pain. But there was some good news this week in terms of treatment for those still living with the after effects. Professor Mark Faghy of the University of Derby is leading a team that's investigating potential treatments, including the use of antiviral drugs to help improve patients' lives. He spoke to ITV News.
We are seeing positive signals in patients reporting that they are feeling better and they've seen an alleviation of their symptoms. The pandemic is often spoken about in the past tense. The pandemic happened or COVID is over for many millions in the UK. It's still very much their reality. We have that kind of responsibility to make sure that we can find ways to help people.
Becky Steed from Nottingham was a GP working in the NHS when the pandemic hit, and she's one of approximately 2 million people still living with long COVID. And she's also one of 70 volunteers taking part in the trial.
For me, it's given hope. That's something which has been really lacking for these last few years, if I'm honest. It helps just with that sense of feeling like you've not been forgotten.
The world is just a lot at the moment, isn't it? But even in times of utter chaos, there are some moments that stand out. We've talked quite a bit about self-confessed ketamine fan and senior White House advisor Elon Musk, but this week saw the world's weirdest car commercial take place with President and part-time car salesman Donald Trump. What the actual truck is going on? Well, there's only one man we trust to sniff out the musk, and that's the Smart 7's tech guru Will Guyatt. Will, what on earth is Donald Trump doing selling Teslas?
Things are tough for poor Elon right now. Sales of Teslas have collapsed 11% in the last quarter alone globally, and if you believe the available data, sales in Europe fell around 70% since Musk started pontificating about interfering in elections. He's also accidentally Nazi saluted at least 2 events, and then he got involved in gutting the American state in the name of efficiency via Doge. It seems to be the growing hatred for Elon Musk in the US that has really got him going. Tesla takedown protests have erupted across the country in recent weeks, with showrooms besieged and charging sites vandalised. This growing domestic unease around Doge is finally what pushed Elon into needing a little hug, which came from his buddy President Trump. The White House South Lawn became the world's largest motor forecourt last week, where Trump created what felt like a series of shit infomercials and pretended to actually buy a Tesla, to the point he was then touting his referral code round on social media to those who might want to buy one. Apparently Trump purchased an $80,000 Tesla Model S, but claimed he wasn't allowed to drive it around the White House, despite President Biden regularly being seen driving a US truck. Despite this strange hybrid spectacle being roundly derided by US media of all flavours, Musk himself took to social media proclaiming it had boosted Tesla's sales. Go figure.
Not sure I want to see Trump behind the wheel of a Cybertruck, but there we go. But Musk's empire's a bit shaky at the moment, isn't it? The SpaceX explosions, Tesla sales crashing. Are we on the brink of an almighty disaster?
We could have now shifted into the Elon Musk era, because it's not currently clear whether our favourite rich bloke is just having a bad couple of weeks or if the tide has truly turned. There's been problems and missteps everywhere. The biggest challenge now is perhaps that Elon is just so ubiquitous. We're beginning to see the chaos that follows him everywhere, and perhaps he's not the business genius we all thought he was. Musk called a series of X outages last week caused by hackers a massive cyber attack, and even tried to accuse hackers from the Ukraine for causing it, whereas experts tell a different story. It was poor configuration of the tech behind X, seeing it fall to a fairly tried and tested form of hacking, known as a denial of service attack, much like when Glastonbury or Oasis tickets go on sale, nothing more sophisticated than that. A pro-Palestinian hacking group had already been identified as the organisers before Elon's inaccurate and politically motivated claim took place on live TV.
All sounds a bit of a mess, doesn't it? But apart from Elon, this week sees Meta roll out something they've borrowed from Twitter, community notes. Is this actually going to work instead of actual fact-checkers?
The fact that the EU is already investigating X for the effectiveness of its community notes software, which intriguingly it's licensing to Meta, a far larger and better resourced tech company, should probably tell you this move is more Donald Trump appeasement than anything else. On X, Elon Musk is one of the most commonly community-noted publishers of misinformation, and it seemingly does nothing for the reach or spread of his guffs. Musk got so peeved recently that people were picking up on his posts and they were getting checked by the community that he suggested the system needed changing. Platforms like Facebook need actual fact checkers to keep people honest. So this is absolutely terrible news. Facts will no longer matter on Facebook in the US, just opinions.
What the fact indeed. And staying with tech giants, the UK government's really keen on getting access to iPhones. What's going on? Are they trying to look at my WhatsApps?
This is one of the trickiest stories we've ever spoken about on the Sunday 7 because it's meant to be bound by strict secrecy laws. We're not even meant to know an important but closed hearing tribunal event took place at the High Court in London last Friday. This is all about access to our data, the stuff that was previously protected by Apple's Advanced Data Protection Program in the iCloud. It meant that Apple couldn't see any of the information you or I had stored, documents, photos or conversations, because they were encrypted and only you or I would have the key to unlock it on our device. The UK government says it needs to be able to read and fully examine our data if they believe there's a national security leak, and this is what's forced Apple to remove the feature rather than compromise their encryption. An open letter from US politicians on both sides urged the UK to remove what it says was a cloak of secrecy around this row, which meant that neither our government or Apple officially commented on it and gave us, as journalists, very little to comment on.
Well, good luck sifting through all my crap memes on my phone, Kia. The hearing is on Friday. Will, when do you think we're going to get a result?
It's almost impossible to say. We understand the session took place, but with no reports, notes or information on the discussions, we don't know currently what's next. One thing that's bugging me right now, though, is that other big tech companies use similar encryption tools and programs to secure our data. Have they been asked to yield to the government's demands? Or maybe they already are following instructions. We simply don't know, and that's just weird.
Oh, Will with a bit of a conspiracy theory of his own there. Finally, Sam Altman has been busy teaching his chatbots how to express their feelings. Will, tell me more about the AI author.
Before we go any further, I should admit this comes with instructions. Be metafictional, be literary, be about AI and grief, and above all, be original. Already you can hear the constraints humming like a server farm at midnight. Anonymous, regimented, powered by someone else's need. This is the start of a story about a grieving person called Mia, and it was created by a currently unnamed offshoot of ChatGPT. After the boss Sam Altman asked it, please write a metafictional literary story about AI and grief. Altman seems pretty pleased with its work, saying it got the vibe of metafiction so right, despite it sounding to me a little bit like Eric Cantona's iconic "When the seagulls follow the trawler, it is because they think sardines will be thrown into the sea," the quote he gave after Kung Fu kicking a Crystal Palace fan. It's really tricky for me to get excited about this AI advance, because let's not forget that right now all chatbots are essentially meat photocopiers. They need copyrighted material to essentially riff from, and this work came from talented creative writers that's now being shamelessly ripped off. There's nothing original or clever about what was written there by ChatGPT. It's just making a new version of somebody else's work.
Good grief. What? Or bad grief, I guess. Thanks, Will. See you next week. Still to come on the Sunday 7, Australia's artificial heart and why your dog might be trying to tell you something. This week saw medical history made in Australia as a 40-year-old patient from New South Wales was able to survive for more than 100 days with an artificial heart. He's the 6th patient worldwide to receive one, and he's just had it replaced with a transplanted organ, but it's a huge leap forward for the tech. The operation took place in 2024 at St Vincents Hospital in Sydney and was a 6-hour-long procedure carried out by cardiothoracic and transplant surgeon Dr. Paul Jansz. The artificial heart's basically an implantable rotary blood pump that's stitched onto the patient's existing heart and then gradually takes over the functions, as Dr. Jansz explains.
That's a moment where everyone holds their breath, but it turns on and it works, and then you slowly wean the patient off the heart-lung machine, which is keeping them alive while you do the surgery, and the pump takes over. And it did. The Bi-VACOR device was invented by Australian scientist Dr. David Timms, and it's intended to help patients with severe heart failure. Some 23 million people worldwide suffer this each year, but only 6,000 actually get heart transplants, which is one of the reasons the Australian government's funded the development of the new device. Dr. Timms says it's potentially a game changer.
He had the device for 104 days before his transplant, so 3.5 months, and he was discharged from hospital along that way. And so that was a world first for us. I mean, ultimately, that's what our goal is, to return these patients back to a normal quality of life. And he did return to a normal quality of life outside of the hospital. So this gives us an incredible hope that in the future, we won't need to bring him back in for a transplant, that they can just stay out, keep the device, for the rest of their life.
New studies suggest that we humans are pretty bad at understanding what our dogs are trying to tell us. You reckon? Somehow Lassie managed to let us know a boy was trapped in a well, but it turns out we're not even sure if our pet's happy or unhappy, according to a new study by Arizona State University doctoral student Holly Malinaro. Inspired by Zoom calls during the pandemic, she recorded videos of the family pet reacting to different stimuli, like a vacuum cleaner or a treat, and then isolated the dog's reaction out of context. When asked, people struggle to identify the dog's mood correctly, suggesting that humans have a blind spot when it comes to what our beloved canines are actually experiencing. Author Rory Cellan-Jones, who's internet famous for adopting a dog called Sophie from Romania, was on Radio 4 to discuss the study and says early on it wasn't hard to tell how she was feeling.
I can only really speak from my personal experience, and we have a dog that is not difficult to read. Sophie arrived, was obviously terrified, and spent most of the first 6 months of her life hiding behind our sofa. And therefore, it was easy to see fear on her face.
Another study recently suggested we're choosing our dogs in part because they remind us of ourselves. It's the so-called mirror exposure effect. Essentially, we're drawn to things that resemble us and we find it comforting. Whether it's a long-haired dog or a similar eye shape, familiarity is what we're looking for. Carol Erickson is an animal advocate with the Pennsylvania SPCA, and she says it's not just physical resemblances either.
Researchers discovered that dogs and their owners shared similar personality profiles, even more than the similarities that you would find with married couples or friends. So you're matching your dog consciously again, or subconsciously, the experts say, just based on so many things, including the color of the dog, the body type of the dog, the personality. And it's so interesting with these animals, but something to think about, why one of the many reasons we so love the animals that we love.
Still to come on the Sunday 7, an alarming warning about frozen slushies and sea turtles.
Right after this.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile, with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome back.
There was good news finally for the communities who live in and around Lake Windermere. It's part of the Lake District National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it's been struggling with pollution and sewage leaks, which have alarmed conservationists and sparked local protests after the lake turned green. The new government's pledged to clean up the polluted beauty spot, and as part of what they're calling the Things Can Only Get Cleaner tour, Water Minister Emma Hardy and Environment Secretary Steve Reed were at the shores of Lake Windermere this week. They were launching a £100 billion national scheme called A Plan for Change, which will see private sector investment in improving sewage infrastructure and stop discharges into the lake. Steve says the first priority is to deal with current pollution levels.
We've secured £200 million from private sector investors. That's a huge first step towards dealing with the problem. At the moment, you've got a lot of sewage pipes that discharge into this lake. They will go, for instance, into a single pipe that will take the sewage safely away to where it can be cleaned instead of being pumped into this lake. The reason that it went bright green was because there was so much sewage going in, it caused an algae bloom, which is damaging to biodiversity, to fish, to birds, and of course even to human health in extreme cases. So that will take away that sewage, so it's not going in there anymore. But we want every single source of sewage to be dealt with as well.
If you're a parent, you'll be familiar with the lure of the slushy machine in your local petrol station or neighbourhood shop, and the pester power of kids when they see the blooming things. But it turns out the slushy is potentially hazardous, and not just because of brain freeze. New research suggests that the glycerol in the drinks, which is used to stop them freezing, can be dangerous, particularly to children aged between 2 and 7. In fact, if your child drinks a slushy too quickly, they could be at risk of glycerol intoxication, which can lead to shock, hypoglycemia, and even loss of consciousness. There have been 21 cases in the UK and Ireland of kids in that age bracket who needed emergency medical treatment after consuming the near-frozen treats. Professor Ellen Crushell is a metabolic paediatrician at Ireland's Temple Street Children's Hospital and also a clinical professor at UCD School of Medicine, and she's the author of the report.
The guidance that currently exists for children under 4 not to be given slushies should possibly be extended up to 8 or further to err on the side of caution, because at this point in time we don't have any transparency about how much glycerol is in some of these drinks.
On a slightly different note, the nation's favourite gardener, Alan Titchmarsh, was sounding a warning of his own this week, but it wasn't intended for young children. Rather, it was aimed at the smashed avocado and sourdough toast fan in your life.
The Mexican rainforest is being felled at the rate of 25,000 hectares per year to accommodate avocados. 1,000 litres of water in a drought-ridden area goes to produce 1 kilogram of fruit. We've got a monoculture growing there, which is now plied with pesticides, because if you've got a monoculture, one crop in one place, it gets more and more susceptible to pests and diseases. And then once you've got this fruit, which has cost you dear, i.e. rainforest and the earth, literally, it's then shipped 5,000 miles across an ocean so that you can have it on your sourdough toast and feel environmentally friendly. I don't think it's a good idea.
Oh, it's an iconic image. Baby sea turtles hatching from eggs and tumbling along a beach until they get to the water. We've seen it in loads of wildlife documentaries, haven't we? We've seen the hazards that face them too. But there's a significant gap in our knowledge about what happens next to the little turtles. We know they return to the beach as adults to mate and lay eggs, but not much was known about what scientists called the lost years in between. But a team of marine scientists at the University of Central Florida have been working to solve the mystery. For the last decade or so, they've been attaching miniature geolocator devices to young sea turtle shells to understand where they go. Dr. Kate Mansfield's an associate professor and director of the Turtle Research Group at the UFC Biology Department, and she spoke to PBS about what they discovered.
We ended up realizing that these are animals that are actively swimming some of the time, and that means that they may not be passively drifting and entrained within an area that could be impacted by, human activities like an oil spill. Our long-held assumptions about these animals may not be 100% correct, in part because it's very hard to find them offshore. So we've improved the best available data on these animals. I would say that is one of the best and most fun things about this project.
This has been the Sunday 7. Wherever you're listening, do us a favour and hit the follow button. We'll be back tomorrow at 7 a.m. with the regular Smart 7. Have a great rest of your weekend. Written, produced and published by Daft Doris.
TaxAct knows small business owners can sometimes use a little help with their taxes. That's why TaxAct has Expert Assist, a team of live tax experts ready to answer any questions you may have. Think of them as your own personal sidekick. Not like one of those funny talking animal sidekicks, more like the super smart nerding out on tax code and business casual attire sidekick, but just as helpful and lovable. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.